A homeless man saves a bullied child, but when he finds out who the boy's father is, his world is turned upside down. A shocking truth, a dark past, and a second chance. This story will leave you speechless. The cold wind cut through the empty streets of New York as Harland Reed pulled his tattered coat tighter around himself. The night was settling in, and the city buzzed with distant sirens and muffled conversations. He sat hunched over on an old bench near a dimly lit playground, watching the world move past him, people with places to go, lives to live. Lives that once resembled his own. 5 years. That's how long it had been since Harland lost everything, his wife, his daughter, his career. The accident that took them away left him broken, drowning in guilt and alcohol. His home became the streets, his days a blur of survival, and his nights a battleground of memories he wished he could forget. Tonight was no different. He had found a spot near the playground, away from the watchful eyes of those who might call the police on a man who no longer belonged in their world. He was about to close his eyes, letting exhaustion take over, when he heard something that made his muscles tense. Voices. Angry voices. Then, a sharp cry. Harland sat up, eyes scanning the playground. Near the fence, under the glow of a flickering street lamp, 3 boys surrounded a smaller child, their backs turned to Harland. The boy against the fence looked no older than 10, his dark curly hair messy, his small hands clenched into fists. He was trying to hold his ground, but it was clear he was outnumbered. One of the bullies shoved him hard against the metal bars. "You don't belong here, loser," one of them sneered. Another kicked the boy's backpack, sending its contents spilling onto the wet pavement. A notebook, some pencils, a crumpled lunch bag. The smallest boy didn't flinch. He held his head high, but his chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. "Say something, huh?" The tallest of the bullies grabbed the front of the boy's jacket. "Where's your daddy now, rich boy?" Harland felt his body move before he had a chance to think. "Hey!" His voice came out hoarse, but it was enough to make the boys freeze. They turned, their eyes narrowing at the sight of the man who had just stepped into their business. A homeless man. A nobody. "What do you want, old man?" the leader of the group scoffed. Harland took a slow step forward. His 6-foot frame, though thinner than it once was, still held enough presence to make an impact. "I want you to leave the kid alone," he said, his voice steady. The tallest boy smirked. "Or what? You gonna call the cops?" Harland didn't blink. He simply stared, his expression blank, his stance unmoving. He knew these types, bullies relied on fear, on the assumption that no one would challenge them. But Harland had nothing left to lose. Seconds passed, and the boys hesitated. Then, with a low mutter, the tallest one spit on the ground. "Whatever. Let's go." One by one, they turned and disappeared into the shadows of the street. Silence fell. Harland exhaled and looked at the boy still standing against the fence. His fists were still clenched, but now they trembled. His lip was slightly busted. "You okay, kid?" The boy hesitated before nodding. Harland took a step closer but didn't want to scare him. Up close, he noticed something in the kid's eyes, pride, but also pain. "What's your name?" Harland asked. The boy wiped his nose on his sleeve before answering. "Ezra." Harland nodded. "You got a place to go, Ezra?" The boy hesitated again, looking down at the scattered contents of his backpack. He bent down, gathering his things. "My dad's at work," he muttered. "He's always at work." Harland watched as Ezra tried to stuff his things back into his torn bag. The sight made something ache in his chest. "Come on," Harland said. "Let's get you patched up." Ezra looked up, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. But there was something about this man, something different. Slowly, he nodded. Harland didn't know it yet, but this moment would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, Harlan sat on the edge of his makeshift sleeping spot near the alleyway behind a small diner. The early sunlight cast a dull glow over the city, the streets still quiet except for the occasional passing car. He rubbed his hands together, trying to shake off the lingering cold. Last night had been different. He hadn't just watched the world pass by, he had stepped into it. Ezra. The kid's name stuck in his mind. He hadn't seen him after walking him home, but something about the boy's eyes, the quiet strength mixed with loneliness, kept gnawing at him. Harlan knew that feeling all too well. Lost in thought, he barely noticed the black car pulling up to the curb. It wasn't until two men in dark suits stepped out that his instincts flared. These weren't cops. They moved with purpose, their gazes locked on him. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes, spoke first. Harlan Reed. Harlan tensed. He hadn't heard his full name in a long time. Who's asking? His voice was rough from years of disuse. The second man, slightly younger but just as imposing, exchanged a glance with his partner before answering. Mr. Asher Coalfield would like to speak with you. The name hit Harlan like a punch to the gut. His pulse quickened, his stomach clenched. Asher Coalfield. That name belonged to a past he had buried. Once, they had been best friends. Business partners. Brothers in everything but blood. They built a firm together, designed some of the city's most striking buildings. But after the accident, after Harlan's life fell apart, he had vanished. He never returned Asher's calls, never gave him a chance to help. Now, after all these years, Asher was looking for him. Not interested, Harlan muttered, turning away. The broad-shouldered man remained unfazed. It's about Ezra. Harlan froze. His fingers tightened on the fabric of his coat. What about him? Get in the car. He'll explain. Harlan hesitated. Every instinct told him to walk away, to avoid reopening old wounds. But Ezra, something told him this wasn't just a coincidence. With a slow, measured breath, he stood up and stepped toward the car. The ride was silent, except for the sound of the city waking up around them. Harlan stared out the tinted window, his mind racing. When the car finally pulled up in front of a sleek glass building, he felt out of place. The kind of wealth and power that radiated from this place was a world he had long abandoned. One of the men opened the door for him. This way. Harlan stepped inside, his boots scuffing against polished marble floors. The receptionist barely glanced at him before leading them to a private elevator. His reflection in the mirrored walls startled him, unkempt hair, hollow eyes, a face aged by time and hardship. When the elevator doors opened, he was led into a massive office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. The air smelled of expensive leather and freshly brewed coffee. And there, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, was Asher. He turned at the sound of footsteps. For a moment, neither man spoke. Harlan took him in, the tailored suit, the perfectly combed hair, the same piercing blue eyes that had once been filled with laughter and plans for the future. But now, there was something else. Something unreadable. Asher, Harlan finally said, his voice quieter than he intended. Asher exhaled sharply, stepping forward. It's really you. Harlan scoffed, shifting his weight. You sound surprised. Didn't you send your guys to track me down? I wasn't sure they'd find you, Asher admitted. He studied him, eyes searching. You look like hell. Harlan smirked bitterly. Yeah. I know. A heavy silence settled between them, years of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, Asher gestured to a seat. Sit. Harlan hesitated, then relented, lowering himself into the expensive leather chair. Asher sat across from him, fingers laced together. He didn't waste time. You saved my son. Harlan blinked. Ezra, He's your son? Asher gave a small nod. Yes. The words hit Harland harder than he expected. He replayed the moment from last night, the kid standing against the fence, refusing to back down. That fire in his eyes. It made sense now. Harland leaned back, running a hand over his stubble. Didn't know you had a kid. Asher's expression darkened. There's a lot you don't know. He exhaled. Ezra's mother left years ago. It's just been the two of us. But I've been busy. Too busy. Harland raised an eyebrow. And you think I can help with that? Asher hesitated, then leaned forward. I know you can. Harland narrowed his eyes. What exactly do you want from me? I want you to come back, Asher said simply. Not just for Ezra. For yourself. Harland let out a dry chuckle. You think a shower and a warm bed are gonna fix me? You don't know what I've been through. Asher's gaze softened. I know more than you think. He paused. I searched for you, Harland. After the accident. I wanted to help, but you disappeared. Harland clenched his jaw, looking away. The past felt like a wound being reopened. I'm not asking for charity, Asher continued. I'm offering you a chance. Stay here. Get back on your feet. Help me with Ezra. Harland scoffed. Why would you trust me with your kid? Because he trusts you, Asher said without hesitation. And because, whether you believe it or not, you're still the best damn man I've ever known. Harland felt something crack inside him. A part of him wanted to run, to reject the offer and disappear back into the streets. But another part, the part that had saved Ezra last night, was tired of running. He looked at Asher. Just one condition, Harland muttered. Asher raised an eyebrow. Name it. I do this my way. A slow smile tugged at the corner of Asher's lips. Deal. And just like that, Harland's life took a turn he never saw coming. Harland stood in front of the massive wooden door of Asher's house, shifting uneasily. It had been years since he had stepped inside a real home, his own, Asher's, or anyone else's. The idea of sleeping under a roof again, surrounded by warmth and stability, felt foreign. He had spent so long believing he didn't deserve comfort that the very thought of it made his chest tighten. Asher stepped beside him and pushed the door open, revealing the elegant interior. The entryway alone looked like something out of a design magazine, polished floors, high ceilings, soft lighting that cast everything in a golden glow. It smelled of fresh linen and something faintly citrusy, a stark contrast to the damp streets Harland had been calling home. Ezra's voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. Dad, is he here? Before Asher could respond, Ezra came skidding into the entryway. His face lit up the moment he saw Harland. You actually came. Harland wasn't sure what he had expected. Wariness? A quiet nod of acknowledgement. Instead, the kid was grinning like he'd just won something. Yeah, kid, Harland said, shifting his weight. I guess I did. Ezra looked at his father, then back at Harland. Do you like spaghetti? Mrs. Lillian makes the best spaghetti. Mrs. Lillian, Harland quickly realized, was the housekeeper. A woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and an air of no-nonsense authority. She gave Harland a long look before nodding slightly, as if silently deciding he wasn't a complete lost cause. You can settle in after dinner, Asher said, clapping Harland on the back. Come on. Harland had eaten plenty of meals in soup kitchens, out of cans, or in the back alleys of cheap diners where owners took pity on him. But sitting at a large dining table, with a real plate, warm food in front of him, and people actually expecting him to eat, it was overwhelming in a way he hadn't anticipated. Ezra, however, didn't give him much room to dwell on it. So, the boy said between bites of spaghetti, are you, like, my new bodyguard or something? Harland raised an eyebrow. What makes you think that? Ezra shrugged. You showed up right when those jerks were messing with me. Now you're here. He twirled his fork in his noodles. Seems like a bodyguard move. Harlan chuckled. Nah, kid. I'm just helping out for a while. Ezra studied him, as if trying to determine whether or not he believed him. Are you staying here? The boy asked. Harlan hesitated, glancing at Asher. For now, Asher answered for him. He's got a guest room upstairs. Ezra grinned. Cool. That single word made something shift in Harlan's chest. It had been a long time since anyone had been happy about his presence. After dinner, Asher led Harlan to the guest room. It was simple but comfortable, a bed that looked too soft for someone used to sleeping on concrete, a dresser, a chair by the window. A fresh set of clothes was neatly folded on the bed. I figured you'd need these, Asher said, watching him carefully. Harlan swallowed hard. This is a lot. Asher nodded. I get it. Harlan exhaled and turned to face him. Why are you really doing this, Asher? His old friend didn't flinch. Because I owe you. Harlan frowned. You don't owe me anything. Asher's jaw tightened. That's not true. He took a breath. I wasn't there for you when I should have been, Harlan. And I know you're too damn stubborn to admit it, but you need help. And I want to help you. Harlan looked away. The weight of the past was suffocating, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was drowning in it alone. You don't have to stay, Asher added. I'm not forcing you into anything. But you saved my son. So if you ever decide you want to save yourself, too, you don't have to do it alone. Harlan let the words sink in. He had spent so long believing he was beyond saving that hearing someone else believe otherwise almost hurt. Finally, he nodded. One step at a time, Asher. Asher gave him a small smile. That's all I'm asking. As he left the room, Harlan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. He wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't completely afraid to find out. Harlan woke up with a start, his breath shallow, his heart pounding against his ribs. For a brief moment, he didn't know where he was. His body was still wired for survival, ready to spring up, to defend himself, to run. But then the unfamiliar weight of the blanket on him registered, the warmth of a Real bed instead of the harsh cold pavement. Right. Asher's house. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling. The nightmare had been the same as always, flashes of twisted metal, the deafening screech of brakes that never worked, the helpless cries of his wife and daughter. Then darkness. Always darkness. He sat there for a while, staring at the wall, until a soft knock at the door snapped him out of it. Mr. Harlan. It was Ezra. Harlan cleared his throat. Yeah, kid. There was a slight pause. Are you awake? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess so. The door creaked open just enough for Ezra to peek in. The boy was already dressed, his messy curls slightly damp from what Harlan assumed was a morning shower. I thought maybe you'd want to come have breakfast, Ezra said hesitantly. Mrs. Lillian makes pancakes on Saturdays. Harlan looked down at himself, still in the clothes Asher had left for him, slightly wrinkled but clean. He wasn't used to morning routines anymore. The idea of sitting at a table, eating food without worrying about when his next meal would come, still felt foreign. But then he saw the way Ezra shifted on his feet, like he wasn't sure if he should have asked. And for some reason, Harlan couldn't bring himself to say no. Yeah, he said, clearing his throat again. All right. Ezra's face brightened. Cool. By the time Harlan made it downstairs, Asher was already sitting at the long dining table, sipping coffee and flipping through his phone. He barely glanced up before gesturing toward an empty seat. Morning, Asher said casually. Harlan grunted in response, which made Ezra chuckle as he slid into his own chair. Mrs. Lillian came in a moment later, placing a plate of pancakes in front of Harlan. "Eat," she said, giving him a pointed look. Harlan blinked. "Yes, ma'am." Ezra laughed outright this time. "She does that to everyone. Even my dad." Asher smirked but didn't deny it. "She keeps us all in line." Harlan picked up his fork and took a bite. It was the best thing he had eaten in, he couldn't even remember how long. The warmth of it spread through him, unsettling in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't used to people caring if he ate or not. Ezra, however, was completely unfazed, digging into his own plate like it was just another normal day. "So, what are you gonna do today?" he asked, looking at Harlan. Harlan hesitated. He hadn't really thought about it. Asher set his coffee down. "I was hoping we could talk about that." Harlan tensed. He had been waiting for this, waiting for Asher to remind him that this was temporary, that sooner or later, he'd have to figure out where to go. "I'm not looking for a handout, Asher," he muttered. "I know," Asher said smoothly. "Which is why I'm not offering one." He leaned back in his chair. "I run a foundation now, Coalfield Housing Initiative. We provide resources for homeless individuals, job placements, rehabilitation programs. I think you'd be a good fit there." Harlan frowned. "You want me to work at a charity for homeless people? You do realize I am homeless, right?" Asher didn't waver. "You were homeless. You're not anymore. And who better to help others than someone who actually knows what it's like?" Harlan scoffed, shaking his head. "I don't know, man. I don't think I'd be good at that kind of thing." Ezra suddenly spoke up, surprising both of them. "You were good at helping me." Harlan turned to him, and the boy met his gaze without hesitation. "You didn't have to help me that night," Ezra said. "But you did." He tilted his head slightly. "Maybe you'd be better at helping people than you think." Harlan stared at him for a long moment. The kid had a way of cutting through things, of saying exactly what needed to be said without overcomplicating it. Asher let the silence sit for a beat before speaking again. "Come with me today. Just check it out. No pressure." Harlan exhaled slowly. "Fine. But just to look." Asher smirked. "Just to look." Ezra grinned and returned to his pancakes. Harlan took another bite of his own, suddenly realizing that, for the first time in years, he actually had a plan for the day. And that scared him more than anything. Harlan stepped out of the car and stared up at the large brick building in front of him. The Coalfield Housing Initiative. It was a 3-story structure, not flashy, but well-kept. People came in and out of the glass doors, some in business attire, others in ragged clothes, their eyes heavy with exhaustion. He knew that look. He had worn it himself for years. Asher walked beside him, hands in his pockets, his usual confident stride unaffected by the weight of their conversation that morning. "You sure about this?" Harlan muttered as they approached the entrance. "You agreed to look," Asher reminded him with a smirk. "That's all we're doing. No one's making you sign a contract." Harlan sighed, already regretting this decision. But Ezra's words from breakfast still lingered in his mind. "You were good at helping me." Maybe. But helping one kid in the middle of the night was different from working in a place like this. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, fresh paper, and something warm, maybe soup from the kitchen down the hall. The space was open, welcoming. A reception desk sat at the front, with a young woman flipping through files. Volunteers bustled around, carrying clipboards, offering people hot drinks, talking in hushed but friendly tones. Harlan had expected something colder, more bureaucratic, but this felt real. "Hey, boss," a voice called. A woman in her mid-30s approached them. She was tall, with sharp eyes and short black hair tucked behind her ears. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, a Coalfield Housing Initiative badge clipped to her collar. The way she carried herself told Harlan she didn't put up with nonsense. "Asher," she greeted, then turned to Harlan. "And you must be the infamous Harlan Reed." Harlan stiffened. "Didn't know I was infamous." The woman smirked. "Anyone Asher personally drags in here gets a reputation before they even set foot inside. I'm Valerie Holt, Director of Operations." She extended a hand. "I keep this place running while Asher plays CEO." Asher rolled his eyes. "She's being modest. She's the reason this place actually works." Harlan hesitated before shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. He could tell she was sizing him up, deciding whether he was worth her time. "You gonna be working with us?" she asked. "Just looking," he muttered. Valerie shot Asher a knowing look. "Aha. That's what they all say." Harlan frowned. "They?" Asher chuckled. "You'd be surprised how many people start here just looking and end up making a difference." Valerie nodded toward the hallway. "Come on. Let me show you around." Harlan followed her, though every part of him wanted to turn around and walk straight back to the car. The first stop was the intake center, where people checked in, some looking for temporary shelter, others needing help with paperwork, IDs, or just someone to listen. A volunteer, a man in his early 20s, was speaking to an older woman with a deeply lined face and frail hands clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee. "We can get you a bed for the night, Ms. Carter," the young man said gently. "And tomorrow we'll help you fill out an application for long-term housing, okay?" The woman nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a quiet kind of gratitude. Harlan swallowed. He recognized that look too. They moved on to the kitchen, where staff and volunteers served meals to a long line of people, some homeless, others just struggling to make ends meet. "Food's free," Valerie explained. "No requirements. No questions. People have enough pride to swallow without us making it harder." Harlan nodded. He remembered the sting of standing in line at shelters, the shame that came with accepting a meal from someone who probably pitied him. But here, no one looked pitiful. Just tired. Hungry. Human. The job resource room was next. A few men and women sat at computers, working on resumes, filling out applications. "We partner with local businesses," Asher said, stepping beside him. "Give people a shot at steady work." Harlan stared at the screens, watching an older man hunt for the right keys as he typed his name. A younger volunteer leaned over, patiently guiding him. It was a different kind of fight, one that wasn't about survival in the streets, but survival in society. And somehow, it seemed just as exhausting. Finally, they stopped at an office near the back of the building. Valerie leaned against the doorframe. "This is where you'd be, if you decide to stick around." Harlan glanced inside. It was small but functional, just a desk, a chair, a few shelves lined with files and books. There was even a coffee machine in the corner. He frowned. "What exactly would I be doing?" Valerie crossed her arms. "Depends. You've got first-hand experience with homelessness, which means you understand things most of us never will. You could work intake, help people get into shelters, teach survival strategies." She tilted her head. "Or you could do something bigger." "Like what?" "Mentorship," she said simply. "A lot of people who come here don't just need food and a bed. They need someone who's been where they are. Someone who can tell them it's not the end." Harlan stiffened. "I'm not that guy," he muttered. Valerie didn't look convinced. "You sure?" Harlan exhaled, glancing at Asher. His old friend was watching him carefully but saying nothing, letting him make his own decision. He looked back at the office. At the desk. At the possibility of purpose, of belonging. His instincts screamed at him to walk away. But for some reason, his feet stayed planted. "Can I think about it?" he finally asked. Valerie nodded. "Take your time." As they headed back toward the exit, Harlan felt an unfamiliar weight pressing against his ribs. It wasn't fear. It was something even more dangerous. Hope. Harlan sat on the back steps of Asher's house that evening, staring at the darkening sky. The city lights flickered in the distance, a hum of life continuing without him. His fingers curled around a cup of coffee that Mrs. Lillian had forced into his hands earlier. It was warm, but his mind was elsewhere, back at the Coalfield Housing Initiative, back in that office where a future had been placed in front of him like an offering. Could he really do this? Could he go from being the man who barely survived to the man who helped others do the same? The door behind him creaked open, and soft footsteps padded onto the wooden steps. Harlan didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Ezra plopped down next to him, pulling his hoodie tighter around himself. "You gonna take the job?" the boy asked, no hesitation. Harlan smirked, shaking his head. "You don't waste time, do you?" Ezra shrugged. "Just wondering." Harlan exhaled slowly, staring at the steam rising from his cup. "I don't know." The boy kicked his feet against the step. "Why not?" Harlan hesitated, searching for an answer that made sense. "Because I don't know if I belong there." Ezra frowned, like that didn't compute. "Why?" Harlan let out a dry chuckle. "Because, kid, I was one of them for a long time. I still am." Ezra was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think that's a bad thing?" Harlan turned to him. The boy wasn't judging, wasn't looking at him like a lost cause, just curious, like he was trying to piece together something in his head. "I don't know what I think anymore," Harlan admitted. Ezra nodded, as if that was an acceptable answer. A comfortable silence settled between them before the boy spoke again. "Did you always want to be an architect?" Harlan blinked at the sudden change in topic. He hadn't thought about that in a long time. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Since I was a kid. I used to build stuff out of anything I could find, wood, old cardboard, even toothpicks. Drove my mom crazy." He smiled slightly at the memory. "Guess I liked making something out of nothing." Ezra grinned. "That's kinda cool." Harlan glanced at him. "What about you? You got plans?" The boy shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe an astronaut. Or a chef. Or both." Harlan chuckled. "Astronaut chef, huh? Cooking in zero gravity might be a challenge." Ezra grinned. "That's what makes it fun." Harlan shook his head, amused. The kid had a way of making things sound simple, like the world was still full of possibilities. After a moment, Ezra's smile faded a little. "Do you ever miss it?" Harlan frowned. "Miss what?" "Building things." Harlan looked down at his hands. They were rough, worn, hands that had once drawn blueprints, once molded models of skyscrapers and bridges. Hands that had built dreams. Now they were hands that had learned to scavenge, to beg, to fight just to see another day. "I don't know if I'd even remember how," he admitted. Ezra tilted his head. "I don't think that's how remembering works. I think you just start again." Harlan didn't know why, but the words hit him hard. He swallowed, staring back out at the city. "Maybe," he murmured. Ezra nudged his arm lightly. "You should take the job." Harlan smirked. "You always this bossy?" Ezra grinned. "Yeah. My dad says it's a problem." Harlan chuckled. "Sounds about right." Ezra yawned, stretching his arms. "Okay, I'm going to bed. But you should do it. 'Cause I think you'd be good at it." Harlan didn't answer right away, watching as the boy stood and shuffled back inside. He left the door open just a little, like an invitation. Harlan sighed, finishing his coffee. Maybe Ezra was right. Maybe he just had to start again. Harlan stood in front of the Coalfield Housing Initiative, staring up at the building like it was some kind of test he wasn't sure he could pass. The morning rush had already started, volunteers checking in, caseworkers meeting with clients, the low hum of conversations mixing with the occasional clatter of chairs and ringing phones. It felt like a world in motion, and Harlan wasn't sure if he could keep up. But he had made a decision. Ezra's words had stuck with him all night. "I think you'd be good at it." The kid didn't say things lightly. With a slow breath, Harlan stepped inside. Valerie was waiting for him near the reception desk, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. She glanced at him, then at her watch. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," she admitted. "Yeah, well," Harlan muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Neither did I." She smirked. "Come on. Let's get you started." The first few hours were overwhelming. Valerie ran him through the basics, how intake worked, how they documented cases, where they kept emergency supplies. He met some of the volunteers, some full-time staff, even a few of the people they were helping. It wasn't an easy job. Some came in desperate, some angry, some too broken to even speak. Harlan recognized their expressions. He had been those people. He spent most of the morning shadowing Valerie, watching how she spoke to people, how she calmed them down, how she never talked at them, only with them. "You listen first," she told him. "That's rule number one. Most people who walk through that door aren't just looking for a meal or a bed. They're looking for someone who actually sees them." Harlan nodded, absorbing her words. It wasn't until the afternoon that she gave him his first real test. A young man had come in, barely older than 20, his hoodie pulled low over his face. His jeans were torn, his hands shoved into his pockets. Harlan recognized the signs. This kid didn't trust anyone. Valerie nudged Harlan forward. "Go talk to him." Harlan hesitated. "What do I even say?" She smirked. "You'll figure it out." With a sigh, Harlan walked over and took a seat on the plastic chair next to the kid. He didn't speak right away, just sat there. Sometimes silence was easier. After a minute, the kid finally muttered, "I don't need anything." Harlan nodded. "All right." The kid glanced at him, a little surprised that Harlan didn't push. "Just needed a place to sit for a while," the kid added. Harlan leaned back in his chair. "Yeah. I know the feeling." The kid hesitated, then snuck another look at him. "You been here before?" Harlan exhaled. "Not here. But places like this?" "Yeah. A lot of them." Something shifted in the kid's posture. He wasn't relaxed, but he wasn't on guard anymore either. Harlan tapped his fingers against his knee. "You got a name?" The kid hesitated before mumbling, "Jace." Harlan nodded. "Nice to meet you, Jace." Another silence stretched between them. But this time, it wasn't so tense. "You hungry?" Harlan finally asked. Jace looked like he wanted to say no, but the slight clench of his jaw told the truth. Harlan stood. "Come on. Let's get something to eat." For the first time, Jace actually met his eyes. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod and followed Harlan toward the kitchen. Valerie found him later that afternoon, leaning against the front desk. "You did good today," she said. Harlan shrugged. "Didn't do much." "You listened," she corrected. "That's more than most people ever do for guys like Jace." Harlan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Valerie crossed her arms. "You coming back tomorrow?" He hesitated. But then he thought about Jace. He thought about the look in his eyes, the same lost look Harland had once carried himself. "You were good at helping me." Ezra's words echoed in his mind again. Harland exhaled and nodded. "Yeah. I'll be back." Valerie smirked. "Thought so." As he left the building that evening, stepping out into the cool air, something felt different. For the first time in years, he wasn't just existing. He had something to come back to. Harland stood at the front steps of the Coalfield Housing Initiative, watching the city wake up around him. The air was crisp, carrying the distant sound of honking cars and early morning chatter. He took a deep breath, adjusting the sleeves of the jacket Asher had given him. It wasn't new, but it was warm, and for the first time in a long time, he looked like someone who belonged somewhere. It had been 3 weeks since he started working at the center. 3 weeks of listening to stories that felt too familiar. 3 weeks of helping people who had no one else. 3 weeks of slowly rebuilding himself, piece by piece. He hadn't realized how much he had needed it. Inside, the building was already busy. Valerie was talking to a caseworker at the front desk, flipping through paperwork. Volunteers were handing out coffee, setting up breakfast in the kitchen. Jace, the kid Harland had met on his first day, was sitting at one of the tables, eating a plate of scrambled eggs. He still didn't say much, but he showed up every day, which Harland took as a good sign. "Hey," Valerie called out as she walked by, not even looking up from her files. "Good to see you actually showed up again." Harland smirked. "I work here, don't I?" She finally looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" He chuckled, shaking his head. He liked Valerie. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Harland made his way toward his small office in the back. It still felt strange to have a space of his own. A desk, a chair, a nameplate that simply read, Harland Reed, Outreach Coordinator. It wasn't a fancy title, but it meant something. It meant he mattered again. Before he could sit down, a familiar voice rang out from the hallway. "Mr. Harland." Harland turned just in time for Ezra to barrel into the office, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Harland raised an eyebrow. "Skipping school already?" Ezra grinned. "Nope. My dad's dropping me off today, and we're early. He said I could say hi." Harland leaned against the desk. "That so?" Ezra nodded. "How's work?" Harland thought about it for a second, then shrugged. "Not bad." Ezra smirked. "That means you like it." Harland shook his head, amused. The kid was too sharp for his own good. Asher appeared in the doorway a moment later, dressed in his usual tailored suit, holding a to-go coffee. "You causing trouble already, Ezra?" Ezra beamed. "Always." Asher chuckled, then turned to Harland. "He's been talking about stopping by all morning." Harland glanced at Ezra. "That right?" Ezra shrugged, kicking at the floor. "Just wanted to see if you were still here." Something about the way he said it made Harland pause. He knew what it was like to wonder if someone was going to stick around. Slowly, he smiled. "Yeah, kid. I'm still here." Ezra grinned. "Good." Asher checked his watch. "All right, buddy. Time to go." Ezra sighed dramatically but didn't argue. Before leaving, he turned back to Harland. "You coming over for dinner tonight?" Harland hesitated. He still wasn't used to being invited to things. But the look in Ezra's eyes made it clear he wasn't taking no for an answer. Harland exhaled. "Yeah. I'll be there." Ezra fist pumped. "Awesome." As he and Asher walked away, Harland stood in his office for a long moment, just existing in the space. It had been years since he felt like he had a future. Now, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And for the first time in a long time, he was exactly where he was meant to be. This story is about redemption, second chances, and the quiet strength of human connection. Harlan's journey from the depths of despair to finding purpose again isn't just about him, it's about the people who refuse to give up on him. Ezra, with his unwavering belief in Harlan, represents the innocence and hope that so many lose along the way. Asher, despite past regrets, shows that true friendship never really fades. And Valerie, sharp and relentless, reminds us that sometimes the right push at the right time can change everything. Harlan's transformation isn't dramatic or instant. It's slow, filled with hesitation and doubt, but that's what makes it real. He doesn't wake up one day and suddenly feel healed, he simply makes a choice. A choice to try, to show up, to keep moving forward even when the past feels like an anchor. The most powerful part of his journey is that it doesn't end with him simply getting his life back, it ends with him helping others do the same. He understands now that surviving isn't enough, living, really living, means connecting with people, giving back, and allowing himself to be seen again. This isn't just a story about a homeless man who finds a home. It's a story about a man who finds himself again. And that's the most important home anyone can ever have.